long time ago that medical emergencies are not my forte. In fact, my husband loves to joke that his worst nightmare is waking up in the operating room and finding me standing over him, dressed in scrubs. Allow me to share some life stories that demonstrate what I mean. We had invited some friends to go boating with us on Lake Roosevelt. We found the perfect stretch of sandy beach near two rivers, and the best part was that there was no one else to share this beach with. When my husband came back from water skiing, he was complaining that he didn't feel very good and thought he'd pulled a muscle. He sat down slowly and carefully in a chair, and then he slipped into unconsciousness and started to twitch. Immediately, I went into panic mode, my trademark reaction. I started running up and down the beach screaming, "Help, my husband's hurt! We need a doctor! Please help us!" Now, as you recall, I just shared with you that we were the only ones on this beach. There was no one else in sight, and where I thought a doctor was going to appear from was anyone's guess. And then our friend Greg, an EMT, shook me back into reality. Later we learned that he had torn the cartilage away from his rib, which is very painful, but not serious. This next story, being a mother, is embarrassing to even share. It was a warm summer evening, and our two boys were in the backyard playing in their tree fort, when suddenly I heard a scream. Now, as a mother, I can easily tell the difference between a nothing to worry about scream and a serious bodily injury scream. As one would expect, I went into panic mode, but this time I didn't run screaming for a doctor. No, I did what any medical emergency challenged mom would do. I turned around and faced the wall. I closed my eyes tightly shut. I put my fingers in my ears and I yelled at my husband, "You have to take care of this." We ended up making a trip to the emergency room in Colville, and our son made an ambulance trip to Spokane before it was over with. I have more stories that I could share with you, but I think you get the picture. I started to wonder to myself, what would I ever do if I was faced with a medical emergency and there was no one else there to take charge? Little did I know that I would soon find out. Our family was camping up the North Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River, and my husband and sons had gone fishing while I stayed at camp. When they returned, they were all excited about a really cool swimming hole that they'd found and wanted me to share it with them. So we all jumped in the motorhome and took off for some family fun. I had to admit the swimming hole did look pretty cool. On the far side of the pool of water was a flat rock ledge that looked pretty accessible. So we carefully picked our way across the sharp rocks around the edge and climbed up onto the rock. It looked like a pretty good idea to jump feet first into the water, but jumping is not what my husband had in mind. He wanted to dive. I quickly reminded him that people get paralyzed by diving in unfamiliar areas. His response? "We already swam here before we came and got you, and it's plenty deep. You're always so paranoid." I pleaded with him one more time. "Johnny Erickson's a quadriplegic from diving. It happens all the time. Please don't do it." But he had his mind made up. And then he and the boys made a plan to all three dive at the same time. Lance would go left, Anthony would go straight, and Nick would go to the right, on the count of 3. I couldn't bear to watch, so I turned around and faced the rock. As my husband began the countdown, and I continued to plead with him. 1, please don't do it, you're crazy. 2, why can't you just listen to me? 3, I heard a splash, but just 1. I turned around and found my boys jumping up and down with laughter, excited that they'd fooled their dad into thinking that they were going to jump with him. Thank God someone had listened to me. But my relief soon vanished as I saw my husband rise up out of the water, looking like something out of a horror movie. He sheepishly announced, "I think I cut my head." "Really?" I screamed. I marched across the rocks that were sharp in my bare feet, and I didn't even feel a thing as I began to rant. "I can't believe you put your lives in danger like that. You didn't listen to me. You always tell me I'm paranoid, but there's reasons for being paranoid. Can't you just listen to me once? And at that pivotal moment, I realized that when I'm mad enough, I can do medical emergencies. I quickly grabbed a beach towel and I wrapped it around his head, which was bleeding profusely. And then I remembered that I hardly had any experience driving our motorhome. But my husband assured me he wasn't dying and he could help me change lanes on the freeway. Our intent was to go to the Coeur d'Alene Hospital, but by the time we reached the freeway, my husband announced, "Heck, I'm not bleeding to death. Let's just go ahead all the way into Spokane to Holy Family, since we've been there before." When we arrived at the hospital, I was anxious to get him into the emergency room, but he was in no hurry. He thought it was more important to shave his face, brush his teeth, tuck his shirt in, and he even tried to take the bloody towel off his head, which didn't turn out very well, because he didn't want to make a spectacle of himself. I reminded him that emergency rooms expect patients to arrive all kinds of messed up. You have a bloody turban on your head. Do you think they're going to notice anything else? We soon learned, however, that having a bloody turban on your head is very helpful when being triaged, because we got ushered into a treatment room in record time. The doctor arrived and started cleaning up his scalp and numbing it up. But soon after, a more serious case arrived and we were completely forgotten. By the time the doctor returned, my husband could feel every stitch and every staple. I've never shared this with him before, but I would have paid the doctor to wait too long on purpose if I'd have thought of it first. I wanted him to never forget the painful consequences of his actions. By that evening, his forehead was bulging out like a Klingon from Star Trek. He looked pretty hilarious. The blood had to go somewhere, and gravity was taking its course. By the next morning, both eyes were almost swollen completely shut, with pretty purple and black coloring. And by that evening, all the blood had pooled into his jaw. I took great joy in his suffering, with just a slight twinge of guilt. But I finally got him to admit that he would have saved himself a whole lot of pain if he'd have just listened to me. Yes!